All right. We are live. Welcome, everyone. Excited to have you join us today. As people start to trickle in, feel free to throw in the chat where you are tuning in from. I am in lovely, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It's actually a cloudy day here. It's supposed to rain, I think, today, tomorrow, or the next day. My kids are actually going to be devastated if Halloween gets canceled. So fingers crossed Friday night will be okay. But um, excited to have everyone kind of tune in with us. We have two amazing people with us. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But we're going to be talking all about, B2B out of home advertising adoption, and a report that's going to be coming with that and everything that goes along with it. So I'm going to let you both introduce yourself. Greg, I'll throw it over to you first, and then Charlie, I'll let you introduce yourself right after.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Greg Wise, founder and CCO here at Onescreen. And also just outside Boston. I don't know many folks who call Boston lovely this time of year, but it's going to get less lovely as we get into winter. And I'm curious, for those that are actually here live, everyone should kind of actually write what they're going to be for Halloween, or what their kids are going to be for Halloween.
So I've got a good one. My oldest is 7. She was dead set on being a ninja. I don't know why or like what, but she was like, I want to be a ninja. And I was like, okay. And then I have twins who are 2.5, and like they were like, well, obviously they don't really care what they are, but my wife and I were like, all right, let's make them turtles. So like Ninja Turtles. And so that's what we're gonna do.
I like it.
Your wife, it's kind of like mine. My wife's a teacher, but she's more creative than I am. So I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah. I take no credit for that, to be honest with you.
I like that. I'm Charlie Riley, head of marketing here at Onescreen. We appreciate you joining us. We did a really great study with about 101 marketers in conjunction with Winter, who does some excellent market research. So we're going to jump into some of the details there. But yeah, thanks for joining. And Nick, we're excited to chat with you about some of those results.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for those that don't know, B2B marketer for many, many years as well. Excited to dive into the report. Again, 101 senior marketers, what they had to say about out of home, what's working, what's misunderstood, and where this channel actually fits in today's mix. Charlie and Greg, again, they're gonna go deep into the research. They're gonna help us unpack what the numbers really mean and what marketers like us should do next. So with that, let's kind of go into the current state of out of home in B2B. And when we think about where things stand, and again, I've gone through the report many times now. The report says 46% of marketers have already used out of home in the past 2 years. Now, that's a lot higher than most people would probably expect in B2B. Greg, question for you. What surprised you most about the current adoption numbers?
Honestly, it was not the sheer percentage. It was actually more interesting to me. It was who was actually driving it. So not just really like your Fortune 100, Fortune 500, but the mid market, like those growth stage companies. Now, not necessarily shocking to Charlie and I and the Onescreen side. It's a lot of who we work with, but was a little bit surprised because a lot of folks would assume that it's the enterprise, sort of like the legacy brands. But I think what really stood out was that, there are a lot more mid-market companies investing in the channel. And I think it's probably because they're feeling the squeeze on the digital side of things. And they also realize that, out of home isn't as old school as they maybe once thought.
It's a good point, and we recorded a podcast earlier this week. But I was at Dreamforce, I guess 2 weeks ago now. And so we were talking about like out of home and like the amount of activations that I saw around Dreamforce and around Moscone, and like just kind of everything between like LED trucks, billboards, just different types of other activations that were all over the city, really. And like I wasn't even staying in like like where the venue was. Like I was probably about like 30 minutes outside, but I still saw, because I took the BART train from where I was staying, which I think was like Millbrae or something like that, into San Francisco. And so there was still, even in the train, like there was so many other like forms of out of home. And I was just like, wow, like this is crazy. Now, obviously San Francisco, big tech city, obviously makes sense. But the number was interesting to me. And I do think that like people are starting to realize that a lot of others can do out of home and be successful with it. So love that. Charlie, for you, even with those adoption stats, why do you think out of home still feels underutilized or under discussed in B2B?
Yeah, I think and the numbers were interesting because there was a little bit of a juxtapose of those that 70 some percent, I think it was, that said they would use it if they I think what it came down to is really what they needed to understand. And we run into that a lot with marketers that we talk to. How do I measure it? How do I target? Things like that. They just maybe don't understand the amount of data that goes into planning an out of home campaign. Like at Onescreen, we subscribe to hundreds of data sources to be able to really hone in on figuring out where out of home could fit into an ABM campaign, for example. Like a lot of times we get that feedback of like, oh, I didn't know that you can do that. Well, we actually can. We can identify where the passive decision makers might be driving home, not only just from work, but where the main thoroughfares are that they're driving their kids to sports, things like that. There's transit ads there. There's bus wraps. There's billboards. There's digital billboards. So I think once they have a conversation and once they understand just the breadth of what can be done from the planning side and the measurement side, I think you see your heads are nodding. We see marketers all the time. Their heads nod when it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Tell me more. So I think it's education, because if you have never run a campaign before, or if you haven't run it in the past, in the past few years, or you've maybe run one small campaign, but you don't understand the full breadth of a larger campaign, there's a good chance that you wouldn't know all those details. But that's what we do. And that's why it's fun to talk to marketers about it, because they get excited when we explain the opportunities they do have.
Love that. Yeah. And I think there's a pretty big gap between how people talk about out of home and how they actually respond to it. And the report includes quotes that say things like boring or outdated, but then those same marketers also say they notice out of home everywhere. So, Charlie, for you, why do you think there's such a strong perception lag here? Again, you're a marketer, like you've been a marketer for many, many years. So I'm sure you have, some things that you've seen over your time too.
Yeah. And I know Greg's got an opinion on this. There's the art and the science of out of home. And I think when you get into the report and the depth of what some of these marketers said, they see out of home, they know billboards, and part of that is that's what we do. We do the data and the science part. So we spend a lot of time figuring out the right places to put those billboards, and the marketers reference those. They reference seeing those in the right locations. I think it's the marrying that up with the art side of it, and that's the creative piece. And I think what happens sometimes is that marketing teams, hey, we're excited, we're going to run this out of home campaign, and they take the creative that they use from a Facebook ad and they just make it bigger and blow it up, and it just doesn't work. There's nuance to how you do creative in an out of home execution, and sometimes I think the references you made, some of the marketers talked about boring or outdated. Out of home is an incredible canvas to do something bold, to do something different, to try to stand out. And you don't have to be abstract. You don't have to do something obnoxious that doesn't tie back to your brand. You do have to tie it back to the brand, but it gives you a really great opportunity on a huge billboard. If you are doing a huge billboard, you've got an awesome chance to really stand out there. If you're doing a street team or an experiential marketing execution, which falls under the out of home umbrella, it gives you a really good chance to stand out and do something different. So it's really the science and the art of marketers need to think about, how do I find the right places to put out of home and to be in front of the right audience? But then what's the creative message, and how do I, this gives me a chance to really try something different.
Yeah, love that. Greg, any thoughts you want to add before I ask you another question?
I mean, look, I think out of home has attention built in, right? We know that because in the report, people are seeing it. They remember seeing like roadside bulletins, 40%, 34% recalling airports, airport ads or transit ads, but you can't recall the actual brand behind it. So to Charlie's point blank, creative is everything. We talk to our customers all the time. It's at least half the battle. And I think getting back to the creativity behind marketing is paramount. So if the attention is built in and the gap is that they're not memorable, well, then if you all of a sudden solve and fill that gap, you now have such a great recipe for recall and impact. Yeah. So look, I think the creative piece of it is huge, because I think it's, look, the other thing too is what 70% of marketers said they would do out of home. Going back to what Charlie talked about in terms of the education component, they would do out of home if it was measurable, or if it this, that, and the other. The thing is, out of home has come a long way. It is all of those things now. So I think, we're at that point now where, we're ripe for more of these folks to engage in the medium.
Nick, I just want to add one thing that Greg referenced. A lot of the marketers said they see out of home in airports, which is a great execution. I think one thing to think about is the frequency of how often you are showing up there. You can't run an out of home campaign once for 2 weeks or for 1 week and expect people to just recall that over time. I think about, and when you mentioned airports, I think about HSBC, because they have had a consistent campaign at huge airports for several years now. And, I think they wrap all of the jetways. I remember that. And just as you referenced airports, I thought like, oh yeah, HSBC, and obviously they're spending a lot of money doing that. You don't have to do that for every type of campaign, but there's consistency there. So that's another factor that comes into it. You have to think about how long you're running a campaign, or how frequent you're showing that the exposure to that.
Yeah, good point. I remember when I landed from Dreamforce back in Boston, I flew JetBlue, and we were driving back to the gate, and I looked out the window and I saw the Dunkin' plane, the Dunkin' Donuts plane, fully painted. I was just like, oh, so cool. I saw it on the news at one point. I was like, I've never actually seen this thing in person. Is it real? Was it a stunt? But no, it was parked at a gate. And I was just like, oh, it's such a cool thing. Like, it was super colorful. And I was just like, immediately, like, again, I drink Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Don't judge me. It's okay. And we have a lot of them. But it was such a cool thing. Greg, I'm curious. So another example, when I was going from the airport in San Francisco to my hotel, I saw a billboard, and it was, I don't even know how, this thing was massive. But all that was on the billboard was Stripe, the company Stripe. And I was so curious, like, it was just the name of their company. There was nothing else on the billboard. I mean, it was a little colorful. But like, going back to like the creative piece, like, is there a reason that like a company wouldn't, I guess, leverage the entire real estate that they have? Like, maybe they have a well-known enough brand that they don't need to, but I just thought it was interesting. I actually took a picture of it. I was like, why does it just say their name and nothing else? But yeah, I'm just curious from a personal standpoint on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it raises sort of what does the overall mix look like, and what kind of brand equity do they currently have? So we'll sort of strip it back, which is a large 14 by 48, in this case, maybe it was a little bit oddly shaped or differently shaped, but roadside bulletin on the 101 from the airport downtown, for example. You're going 80 miles per hour, and you don't necessarily have a lot of time to actually read the billboard itself or the copy, right? So you could, in fact, give them kudos to, hey, they are using that real estate to the best that they possibly can, because like you're only able to capture attention in sort of a split second. And that obviously depends on where the billboard is, how long of a read it is. So how long do you have while you're driving, and how long are you seeing it before you pass it, right? Is it on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, all of those things. Now, you don't want a roadside bulletin to have a ton of words on it. Anyone who's listening right now, live or will be, you will now notice this on your major roadways in your towns and cities. You will now notice the billboards that, quite frankly, are wasting money because they have all of these words on the billboard, and you can't even tell what it says, and you don't even know who the brand is. The other thing that Stripe is likely doing, leveraging other format types, inventory types within the market to continue and further tell the story. Give an example. We just launched a campaign for Catalent, and Catalent just did bus shelters, premium bus shelters in New York City. And the creator for the bus shelters told a story. It actually had some copy on it that would not have worked for a roadside bulletin. But a bus shelter is taking advantage of dwell time, pedestrian traffic, people who are walking by slowly and or stopped somewhere so they can actually read. So it's likely Stripe is also incorporating that to be able to further tell the story.
Yeah. And I bet that they have, like Greg said, they know that more than likely your destination is probably somewhere downtown. So they probably have other inventory around there that could continue the story. And in reality, it sounds like it worked because you recalled it, you remembered the brand, and you brought it up in a future conversation. So in some way it worked for them. But like Greg said, understanding how to utilize the real estate you do have and not trying to architect the idea. I think you see this a lot of times. You might see a billboard that has a URL on it with like 3 slashes and it's like .com/something. Nobody is going to, first of all, you don't want someone getting into an accident. So like you don't want that. But the problem with that is that might be the tactic that success is measured on. And unfortunately, you're setting yourself up for failure. If you're hoping that people are going to remember the super long URL or go to it, you're not giving yourself a chance to succeed with that.
Makes perfect sense. All right, let's dive into another big theme that I saw in the report. And it's that, Charlie, you mentioned a little bit earlier, and Greg, you did as well. But like out-of-home adoption isn't just for enterprise brands. Mid-market companies, especially in SaaS, are kind of actually leading the way. So Greg, for you first, what patterns do you see in terms of company size or stage, and who's using out-of-home most aggressively?
Yeah. So obviously this touched a lot on the B2B side of things, the B2B world, but the same is sort of true on the D2C, B2C side too. So these are, when we talk about mid-market, these are sort of like your high growth, emerging challenger brands, if you will, right? So I think that the thing that we're seeing with these mid-market brands and on the B2B side, these are your series, A and above. They just raise 15, 20, 30 million. Maybe they have 20 folks or so at the organization and they're scaling quickly. They're growing fast. They're in that growth scale mode. They're usually backed by a well-known VC, for example. There's a ton of those out there. We work with a lot of them. And what's interesting about those companies is that they're agile enough to kind of experiment. But they're not big enough yet where, they're bucketed under one of those kind of like legacy brands who kind of can't think outside the box, right? They can be progressive. They can think through sort of like the modern ways to, to build their business. And, they're using out of home to fill a very real gap, right? Which is physical brand presence that they now realize that digital channels just can't provide. And a lot of those businesses have marketers that spent the last decade just doing those digital channels, right? And if we think about a big reason why a lot of folks are doing out of home, it's not because digital channels don't work at all, but they are less effective. And I'd be shocked to find any B2B marketer out there that tells me that CAC is fantastic, LTV is phenomenal, and every single number is great just from your digital channels, because they're not. So they have to invest those dollars elsewhere. There's not that many other channels to test. So out of home is there for them. And I think that's why you're also seeing an influx of those folks in the space.
Love that. Charlie, for you, so, it was mentioned in the report that companies investing in brand are the ones most drawn to out of home. What's the connection there? Like, 25% of the respondents thought out of home was reserved for big brands only, DTC, finding a moat with like competitors flooding the B2B market. So I guess like, what have you seen on like that side of it around, more of like, hey, listen, is out of home too expensive ultimately?
Yeah, I think you sort of referenced one of the reasons there, like, like to add to what Greg was talking about, like brands that are trying to find a competitive advantage is now you're seeing there's a lot of competition. And so, you see one brand, I mean, look at, I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, you find any emerging brand, and all of a sudden now it's very easy to see 2 or 3 competing brands come. And there's honestly, there's some element of commoditization there where it's like, how do you truly have a differentiation? What's going to win is brand equity. And that's the trust built over time, so that it's not just complete lead gen, smacking you in the face with digital ads all the time. It's rounding out how you tell the story in the real world. And that includes out of home. We're not naive to think that somebody's going to move their entire budget to an out of home campaign. We wouldn't suggest that. We would suggest that wraps around to their digital channels. But brand is making its brand has its comeback now, as people are starting to say, or like we talk about this on our podcast with guests all the time. Brand has a say in the marketing mix. It's not just complete demand gen. And I think what out of home gives you a chance to do is it gives you a chance to highlight the influencer on a billboard, and it's a real person and people can relate to that. It gives you a chance to have some fun. Back to that creative idea, it gives you a chance to have a personality and add to that, where the two-dimensional element you have on digital channels, that maybe there's some of that lacking there. So I think we're seeing that. We're hearing more marketers come to us. We talk to a wide range of marketers. We talk to demand gen marketers. We talk to media buyers. We talk to field marketers. We talk to brand marketers, and they have a say in the campaigns that are running alongside demand gen marketers. So it's not exclusive to just like a demand gen channel or a brand channel. It crosses over both of those. And I think it's really important for the brands, the ones that want to win, they need to invest in brand as much as just straight buying ads and just bombarding the market.
And I have to just jump in quickly, which is, and I don't think this is a hot take, but brand is part of the moat. Like full stop, right? AI is leveling the playing field. This is not what it was 10 years ago. In brand, and out of home falls under that umbrella. It's not the only thing under brand, right? But brand is part of the moat now. When anyone can go build whatever tool quickly, right? What is that differentiator? And that is a core component of it. Just so happens that out of home is a big part of brand, which is why I also think you see a lot of these mid-market companies investing in it.
I think we talked about this example on our podcast with you, Nick. Actually, Gong's a great example. Call recording. They were one of the first ones out of the gate. And if you read Udi's book, and he talks about, they actually did out of home early on. Now AI is given, there's probably 5 or 10 examples now that you could think of to record your calls. But who built the moat of building up a brand early on? It was Gong. And so I think that's a really good example of like, it's easy to have competitive space now, but they put the investment in and they built up their brand over years, and people still, they remember that brand first.
Your dogs think so also.
He loves it. Like loves Gong, loves Udi, loves Gong. Yeah.
Love it. All right.
Shout out to Udi.
Let's talk about targeting and measurement. Those are the 2 biggest questions I hear anytime out of home comes up. People think it's not targeted and it's not measurable, but your data tells a different story. So Greg, for you, let's start with targeting. What does that look like today, and what's actually possible?
Yeah. So this is, to me, where like modern out of home gets the most exciting. The truth is that I don't think marketers realize the kind of data that we have access to. But I'll start by, as an example, we have the ability to pull in demographic data, psychographic data, consumer data. So as people, consumers, our data is being aggregated, and it's a little frightening as consumers and human beings. However, it's happening. It's been happening for a long time. And that's how marketers have been able to target an audience on digital channels. But guess what? You can actually also leverage that data to target folks in the real world. And it's not just about, hey, what billboard is just the most cost effective or the one that, you know, is in Times Square. We can actually find the right billboard or the right bus shelters that index the highest against a particular audience that has specific attributes. You want to target, you know, females between a certain age with a certain household income, who hold a certain kind of profession, who drive a certain kind of car, who have typically shopped at Whole Foods and have, you know, are fitness enthusiasts. Okay, what are the top markets, the zip codes in the inventory where we are literally observing the most concentration of those kinds of people at any given time? I don't think most marketers out there realize that we leverage that exact motion, right? That exact formula to help to build a campaign. Knowing that, right? Usually when we tell marketers and show marketers what we're doing, they're like, whoa, we thought this was just like a random billboard on the side of the highway. And we like call someone up and we're just like, what do you have? Completely different now. And the ability to be the best stewards of someone's investment and use it wisely to make impact is there. Core component of how we recommend doing out of home.
Love that. Do you see it, like, I guess, where do you even, like, can it continue to progress like a couple of years from now even more, or are we like at its peak?
You know, it's interesting. Could we so I think, you know, I don't think we're at the peak yet. I think that, you know, when you think about Minority Report and you think about Tom Cruise going through the airport and he's walking by the ad and it's like, hey, you could use a Guinness because it kind of senses his emotions. I don't know if we'll go that far. I will tell you, when we first set out to build Onescreen and we were, you know, out there raising money, we did have this idea of building Minority Report in the real world. People kind of got freaked out, and now we're inching closer to it, quite frankly. You know, we might get there, who knows? For now, I think, though, there is hey, this is almost like an unknown medium for people, right? Like, we just have to crawl, walk, run type of thing, right? There is so many marketers out there and brands who have never done this before or experienced the medium. We're just working on making it more approachable, more analogous to what they're used to.
Yep, 100%. Love that. Charlie, from your point of view, what are some real ways that marketers are measuring out of home now, whether it's brand lift, pipeline, or search?
Yeah, it comes down to what their initial goal is to start. I think if you're, and it really depends on the execution, and there's so many factors that go into it. We talked about some of those, like length of a campaign. If you're doing a conference, there's one thing there of like, you know, what are you trying to do? Are you just trying to drive booth activity? Are you trying to drive just awareness and you want a viral moment because you want people to take, you know, photos and share them on social channels? Well, that's a measurement element there that you have to factor in, of like making sure you're paying attention to those types of things. So it really depends. I mean, if you're running an ABM campaign, again, back to that example that that out of home falls into that. Well, what is the target account list? How many meetings did you draw out of that that target account list? How many of those individuals from those companies actually visited your website? Like, that's a small, narrow targeting standpoint. But like, one of the best ways to probably identify success with an out-of-home campaign is the brand lift that comes from organic search, direct search on your website from those who are exposed to ads. So say you're running a campaign, and we've done this with brands. We might run a campaign in 2 or 3 markets. We'll identify those who were exposed to ads versus those who weren't. And you'll see 15, 20, 25% lift in organic search traffic because someone saw your billboards, they saw multiple billboards. And when they were in a safe place to actually search for your brand, they went on their phone and looked it up. So they weren't maybe scanning a QR code. It was just it was a recall of, oh, I got to go look what they're doing. Kind of like your Stripe example. It's you weren't doing that right away, or they didn't have this unique URL there. And that's one thing you can do. Again, it depends on what you're trying to measure. It really comes down to, there are so many different ways to measure out of home. It just, we want to work with somebody to understand what's your end goal here, and how do we tie that back into success with your other campaigns. But there are ways to do it. It's not just guessing. And I think that was one of the things that I think a high percentage of marketers said in this report was, how do I measure this? You're not going to be able to measure it as real time as maybe a paid search campaign. So like we just have to set the expectations with that. But once we can explain how you can measure it, depending on what your overall goals are, that's how it all ties into the overall success of what they're trying to do.
Love that. Do one of you want to answer this question from Denise? It says, how do you know or track those attributes and assign it to a particular billboard?
Great question, Denise. So, on our end, there's aggregation of data. There's a lot of data out there, and it usually starts with the telcos. We are aggregating that data. Now, it's important to note that there's no personally identifiable information, right? When we talk about data, or when I say things like mobile devices, we don't have the PII there, but we do have the fundamental attributes, the underlying attributes of those devices. So we observe 250, 260 million unique devices every single day across the US, for example. And we are actually looking to see where there are highest concentrations relative to total population, or just total amount of those devices relative to a certain audience type in a certain area around a certain piece of inventory. That's kind of like the flow from the telco down to the inventory level. There's a lot more like nuance there. Hopefully that answers the question, but it's identifying real people with actual real movement patterns that go by a certain neighborhood, a street, in a particular inventory location.
Fantastic. Yeah, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. We're almost up on time. We have one last section that we're going to dive into, and then if there's any questions, we're more than happy to answer those as well. But the last thing is, one of the most interesting takeaways from the report was how many marketers said they want to use out of home to swarm events. That's something that I've seen a lot in ABM and field marketing, and it's such a powerful lever. Again, I've been a big proponent. I've used out of home for many, many years now. Charlie, for you, why do you think events are such a strong use case for out of home right now?
It's a great question. There's a couple reasons. I think because it's there's a lot of options there. You can wrap cars. You can do swarms of wrapped vehicles that really stand out, like the experiential things around having a street team hand out coffee or hot chocolate, or sampling, things like that. They're all dressed in your brand, and they're able to have one-on-one conversations. Like, that's when you talk about an ROI on being able to talk to people, like that's a great execution there. I think it's also something, it's an entry point for someone to try out of home advertising, because if you're a marketer and you're sitting there thinking, well, a brand campaign might be, I have to pick 3 cities. I got this long multi-month campaign. Yes, like those work, but that from an entry point, if that's your first execution, that might be a hard execution to sign up for right off the bat, where events like trade shows are back. There's no shortage of events for even, for industries and such, and they're expensive. People buy a booth, they spend all this money flying a whole team there. They want an ROI on that. And out of home can help fill in the gaps of just buying the booth and hoping people show up, which is not a strategy. So you can do things from starting from when people land at the airport. And it's, again, back to sort of what Greg talked about. It's not just guessing. We have data points that can help identify the airlines that people most likely travel from previous years. So we're not going to wrap the wrong luggage the baggage claim, we know exactly which ones they're coming in from, so we can identify those ones. So we're getting your ads in front of the right people. We can do ads on the way from the airport to the trade show venue. You can do ads inside the elevators at the host hotels. You could do fun things. We talked about this idea with Kathleen Booth of, ambush marketing, and she had branded urinal cakes in bathrooms. Like, talk about people were talking about that, and that was an ambush campaign. There are so many executions you can do around events that I think it's a great starting point for someone who's, how do I incorporate this channel? How do I utilize this? And how do I show a better ROI and have some fun at events? Yeah. Out of home is a great way to do that with trade shows.
Love that. And I guess follow up to that, would you say that this should be looked at as more of a multiplier versus a siloed tactic?
Yeah, I think the mistake marketers can have is it's an afterthought. It's you budget out, you spend all your money, you plan all these things for a conference, and then you're like, oh yeah, by the way, we have extra money. Let's maybe add something to it. Inventory is a big thing. Right now, we are seeing inventory. We're seeing a lot of inventory dry up in major cities, which is where a lot of these trade shows are. So if you are planning a campaign right now in the first half of next year, there's a good chance that good inventory is already being taken up. So like, this isn't a last minute, let's figure this out. It should be part of your overall strategy to begin with. Like, how do we make an impact? What are we trying to do with the show? It should be in your initial planning process. It shouldn't be an afterthought.
Love that. Greg, last question for you here is, how do you think out of home complements other channels like paid digital, social, or PR?
In a big way. So rising tide lifts all boats. And I say that probably on every single podcast or every single webinar that we do. Out of home is the ultimate amplifier, and it makes those other channels hit harder. So it's not do you do this or out of home? It's you do this and out of home. And that's how it all kind of works together. So, look, if, we've seen folks do, market takeovers, but they're also doing LinkedIn ads. They're also incorporating an ABM component to their campaign. So then they have a sales team that is actually targeting, going after certain accounts while the out of home is providing air cover, and while there's more of a one-to-one sort of reach with the LinkedIn ads, for example. And then maybe they're doing a product launch and there's a PR announcement around that as well, focused around that particular market. That is how you do it, right? That is how you win with out of home, and that's how you win when it's part of a well-orchestrated marketing mix.
Yeah, I love that.
And I do just have to say this too, because I've been doing this for quite a while out of home, and look, I've never seen out of home as hot as it is. And so, Charlie, you mentioned it, and based on your question, Nick, as you're thinking about 2026 planning, B2C, B2B, doesn't matter. Start to think about out of home can be incorporated into the overall mix, but buy and plan as early as possible. We're talking about inventory. There's a finite amount of it. This is real estate. And so a lot of the good inventory, and I have not seen this before in your markets, even your tier one markets that have always been hot, they're even hotter. The demand is off the charts. And you start to have things like the World Cup that's happening in 2026. The billboards that you might think you want are likely the same billboards that your competitor wanted and also already bought. So keep that in mind. The earlier you can plan, the better. I just have to say it because I'm trying to do that on every single phone call, because and marketer I talk to, because it's the truth, and out of home is on fire.
Love that. Amazing. Well, I know we're up on time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll wait a minute or two and we'll see if anything comes through. But, huge thanks to you, Greg and Charlie. Appreciate it. This report was packed with insight. Like, I love data-backed reports. Like, I think like from a learning perspective, that's the type of kind of like research that I personally enjoy. And to me, the biggest takeaway is this. out of home isn't just for brand awareness. It's measurable, targetable, and more accessible than most B2B marketers actually realize, including myself. Like, and again, I've done this for a while. So if you want to dig in deeper and talk about how out of home could work for your next campaign, reach out to Greg and Charlie or hit me up. Like, I'm happy to jam marketer as well on different ideas, and appreciate everyone being here. And yeah, it doesn't look like there's any other questions, so we can wrap things up. Appreciate everyone spending some time with us, and we'll send out the recording.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to Winter too for putting this together with us, and we appreciate you listening and joining.